Good afternoon by now, everyone. First of all, before I start, very big thanks to the General Authority for Competition, not only for inviting us, but for organizing this great event. This is remarkable. Thank you to all the audience. You've been extremely patient. So I'll try to be relatively concise. And thanks also for this opportunity to show not only our experience, but also discuss your domestic experiences. The first panel was very interesting for us because I learned a lot of things that I didn't know before. So thank you to everyone. Again, special thanks to the General Authority for Competition. Very quickly, I'm going to go through our experience at the OECD in dealing with cases of collusion. I will skip parts of my presentation that have been dealt with before. This is the advantage of being one of the final speakers. I have an easier task because the esteemed speakers before me covered a lot of ground. And I will start with a disclaimer. We are a bit like the World Bank, unlike what my colleague from France will say later, and unlike what Daniel Glad said before, and our Saudi Arabian colleagues, and our Egyptian colleague, we do not investigate cases of collusion. We are not enforcers at the OECD, which stands for Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. We are an intergovernmental body that listens to our members and non-members. We collect good practices, we see what goes wrong and what goes well, and we try to spread it across the world. So we are not investigators, we're not enforcers. Even if we become aware of a case of bid rigging, we have no possibility of imposing sanctions or of reporting it. What we're doing is advocating for improving procurement and improving competition so that there is less bid rigging. And maybe zero one day, we're not there yet. So, this is a slide, it's a general slide. Everyone before me said it already. Why is competition good? Competition is good because it lowers prices and it increases quality, as it were. And it's critical to have competition in public procurement, especially in critical sectors of the economy, sectors like health, where we know from OECD internal data, statistical data, that health is where most of public procurement goes. In OECD members, the health sector absorbs 1/3 of procurement. There is infrastructure, there is transport, so all key sectors where you have procurement, you need competition to make sure that you get good prices and good quality, the best correlation thereof. Sometimes you will want to buy cheaper, and sometimes you will want to buy more quality. But either way, with the objective that you have fixed, you will always want the best outcome, and competition gives you that. But why do companies collude? Why not compete with each other and they improve and the best wins? Because clearly this is very stressful. It creates a huge insecurity of who will be the best and who will win. So competition creates the stress that the winner will take everything. The winner will take it all. And collusion removes the stress. It gives a sense of false security, false until a competition authority investigates, right? That the market players will be able to share the market without uncertainty, insecurity, and competition, and they will arrive at an outcome that will be optimal for them and suboptimal for the taxpayer. They will basically be allowed, without competition, to increase their prices, and their increased profit, they will share it among themselves in accordance to the scheme that they have devised. We just heard from the US that we have estimated, and you see that, unless I'm mistaken, I cannot see this far, in the little square, that collusion increases prices by 20%. Collusion can increase prices by way more than 20%. We had looked at a case in Mexico, again it wasn't our case, where a collusive scheme in the health sector The medical product was human insulin, what you need for diabetic patients. The overcharge, the collusive profit, was 57.3%, so it was almost 60% more. And this is for a scheme, for a cartel, that went on for at least 4 years, that were sanctioned by the Mexican Competition Authority, and maybe before that, only they didn't find data before that. This is, I'm not going to go to walk you through the OECD graphs. This is just our latest calculation of the percentage of public procurement in government expenditures and the percentage of public procurement in GDP. You can have it because I think I have talked to the General Authority for Competition and they have informed me that you will have access to the slides. The slides give references, and if you need any data, you can search it online, and if you don't find it online, GAC has my emails and I have access to the data. So you're extremely welcome to contact the OECD if you need more data. By the way, something that I should maybe have said at the beginning, if someone doesn't understand anything I say and wants to raise their hands, I know there are microphones in the room and I will answer the question. I'm just letting you know. I also have a very good visual overview of the room, so I think I can even see you myself. If not, my colleague will let me know, I hope. Right. So something we talked about a bit, especially in the first panel, which was the domestic panel where we saw represented Saudi Arabian authorities. We talked about different crimes in public procurement, and Daniel Glad just talked about different white-collar crimes in public procurement. I just wanted to make sure that we draw a distinction between corruption and collusion. They are both crimes, they are both white-collar crimes, they both affect public budgets, therefore they both can affect and primarily do affect public procurement, but they are different crimes foreseen usually in different laws. I say usually because sometimes collusion is also part of a country's criminal code. And they have different legal aspects. Corruption is, as it were, a vertical relationship. It's a relationship between a civil servant and a company, where the flow of illegal money goes from the company to the civil servant, as Daniel Glad explains, in the form of bribery or kickbacks. So basically, a company pays off a civil servant to win illegally a contract. The public budget is directly affected, but the agreement is public to private sector. Collusion is not like that. It is an horizontal relationship. It's a relationship between competitors or potential competitors, so bidders in a public procurement tender or potential bidders, companies that could have bid and did not bid. The public sector does not be implicated, and in fact, the public sector sometimes is not implicated, is not aware. They are duped thinking that there is competitive procurement and there is none. Before joining the OECD, I was a public procurement lawyer, and I have been part of a case where there was, beyond any doubt, a collusive scheme, and also beyond any doubt, zero corruption, because we were advising the public sector. So the public sector was strict. Therefore, these are two different crimes that are condemned, punished under different laws, and often the case, beyond a certain point, follows a different path. Corruption in all OECD countries is a criminal offense. Collusion is a criminal offense in half of the OECD countries. It can only be an administrative offense. However, these two crimes often coexist. And when they coexist, and this I think is the square at the bottom of the page, they affect public procurement a lot more. Because by happening in the same process, they become a lot more dangerous, like this. You create a vicious circle where a company that pays a kickback, bribes a public official to win a contract can also agree with its competitors to make sure that they stay out and they don't disturb the equilibrium, to agree on a collusive scheme and share the profits. In order to maintain in the future this cartel, this collusive scheme, there is incentive on the part of the companies that participate in the cartel to continue paying the public sector so that they don't pay attention and report this crime, etc. And you create a circle that you need the intervention of anti-corruption and competition authorities to break. So once you enter into the circle, first of all, the public purse is affected in two ways, through two different crimes. The taxpayer is directly affected. Obviously, all public procurement money is public money, right? It comes from taxes. What is happening when there is collusion and when there is corruption is that this taxpayers' money is transferred directly into the pockets of the cartelists without ever being used for any public good. So you want to break this circle by using the double enforcement of competition and corruption authorities. And in this, the enforcement work of competition authorities has a double role. Although they will only pursue collusion, they can be immensely helpful in bringing down corruption schemes. So what do? We don't investigate, I said it, we don't impose fines, we don't interrogate anyone. What we do is what you see there. We collect the good practices of our members. We collect good practices of non-members, but only with the members we arrived at the kind of instruments that we at the OECD call recommendation with a capital R. It's a soft law instrument, right? It's not law, and we cannot, as I said, we don't have the possibility of enforcing it. But we have the possibility of disseminating it, which is what I'm doing here today, and it's a pleasure to do it. We have a recommendation that's called the Recommendation on Fighting Bid Rigging in Public Procurement. We adopted it 10 years ago, and since now it's a bit old, we are revising it. We're using experiences like the experience in these conferences and what we heard in the previous panels to enrich the recommendation. For example, it was mentioned before, in the new recommendation that is under revision, that you cannot see online, but I know it because I'm working on it, there will be a lot of emphasis on access to data. The use of data analytics to find collusive schemes in procurement, how can competition authorities access data, the importance of cooperation of competition authorities with procurement authorities and regulators that we know often hold data, and other specific clauses. This recommendation is accompanied by guidelines that were adopted a bit earlier and were incorporated in 2009. And I'm mentioning the guidelines because they also exist on our webpage in Arabic. So if you ever want to download them, it's very simple. You can Google it. If you Google this name, they will give you access to the link of the guidelines in Arabic. What are the sources of our documents? The sources of our documents are the good practices in our members. And we have in these documents, in these guidelines, two lists, a list that is called the design list that aims at better procurement, basically, and a list, it's a checklist, guidelines, that is called the detection list and aims at detecting collusion if you cannot prevent it through better procurement. Generally speaking, and I understand a lot of the audience comes from the public procurement world, the design checklist is extremely understandable and quite obvious to procurers because it gives best practice on how to design tenders. And since they know how to design tenders, they already are familiar with some best practices. What we do is disseminate and complement them. The detection checklist, it's exactly the reverse. It's known to competition authority officials because they detect bid rigging. It's less known to procurement officers who are less aware of what competition authorities do. What we're trying is to bring these two communities together, make sure that they talk to each other, that the competition authorities understand how a procurement is run, and that competition specialists have this knowledge so that when they investigate the case, they are familiar with the particularities of procurement, and vice versa, that public procurement officers are aware of the mandate and what competition authorities can do to help them. I'm not going to go through the whole design checklist that is behind my head, just to say you have it, as I said, in Arabic, that overall in procurement it's important to know the market where you're going to issue a tender for, to make sure that you have as much participation as possible and as little communication of bidders among them as possible. There are other requirements that are spelled out there, for example, making sure that the tender documents are very clear, avoiding to be predictable in how you buy, etc. These are quite detailed, and I think it's more worth if you read it than if I talk about it. A market where collusion is more likely is a market that is concentrated. A market with few companies, a market with few similar products. A market where collusion is less likely is the exactly opposite. A market with lots of companies, lots of products, dissimilar products, and asymmetries in the way that procurers buy. This is an example of what you should do before you launch a tender. Look at the market and see, do you have a market where collusion is more likely? It could be construction, where there are not many big companies able to deliver a big contract. Or are you could you be more peaceful in that you are in a market where collusion is less likely, and there you have to be maybe not as extremely careful as in the first case. This is the the detection checklist, which gives you the signs that you have to look for as a procurement authority first to see if maybe there is cartel, and as a competition authority second to start a case. For example, a usual indication is if you have two bids that have identical data or identical mistakes, because if it's right, it's right. Right is right. But a mistake is a mistake, and it shouldn't be identical because that's very suspicious. It means that you are copying the offer of another, and that means that you have the access to the documents of the other company, i.e. you're talking to them. Or you have sudden price increases or decreases that you cannot explain. If you have a sudden price increase, it may be that all firms in one market are cartelizing the market. There are other aspects, again, they are in these guidelines that exist in Arabic. I'm not going to go through them also because people before me have talked about it, and Alexis is going to touch upon some of these things later on. What you do if as a procurer, you suspect that there may be collusion? You record all data, you throw away nothing, you keep really detailed records. You don't discuss your suspicions with the bidders, it's very important. You contact the competition authority that will take it from there. Procurers are not investigators, competition authorities are, and it's important that the file is given at an early stage to the competition authority and is as full, as comprehensive, and as intact as possible. So it's a good practice to not talk to bidders because they will shred evidence, but you can, as a procurer, let know your internal legal or compliance department. And one last thing is what we do at the OECD. Apart from these guidelines that I talked to you about, we also do projects with countries. So we take our guidelines, we go inside countries, members and non-members, and we apply the guidelines to their procurement law and practice, and we find out if it's according to best practices. We have done 12 that you can see there. We have found, this you can have in the slides, which are also translated in Arabic. We have found things that are right or wrong in the procurement practices, and sometimes we assess what's right or wrong ex post. So I'm going now to the last slide, which shows what we find ex post. We had advocated to a Mexican procurement agency to change their procurement practices. And what we found is that when they opened their procurement to international competition, their prices lowered by 1 to 2%. When they passed from directly awarding a contract to open competition, the prices lowered by 11 to 12%. All this to say that these recommendations and guidelines appear very theoretical, but when you apply them, they have tangible outcomes. I'm going to end here. This is my email. If you have questions, I will be very happy to take them. And also, if you have questions to me personally, I'm happy to take them after this discussion. Thank you very much.